Some men don't raise their voices because they don't need to. Others do it because it's the only power they have left. The first thing I noticed wasn't his face. It was the silence that followed him. It rolled across the room like a storm you could feel before you saw it. Glasses stopped clinking. Conversations died mid-sentence. And even the pianist missed a note before catching himself. I had been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight, and nothing about tonight was supposed to be different. Same overpriced wine, same polished smiles, same men pretending money made them untouchable. Then he walked in, and suddenly the air felt expensive and dangerous at the same time. Roman Vescari didn't need an introduction, not in this city. His presence did the talking, and everyone listened. I adjusted the tray in my hands and kept moving, because that's what you do when power enters the room. You don't stare, you don't react, you don't exist more than necessary. But I looked anyway. Not long, not enough to be noticed, just enough to understand. Dark suit, tailored perfectly, not a wrinkle out of place. The kind of control you don't buy, you build. His eyes scanned the room once, slow and precise, like he was memorizing everything worth remembering. When they passed over me, they didn't stop, and somehow that annoyed me more than if they had. I turned back to my table, steadying my breath, reminding myself this was just another shift. Just another man with too much money and too many people afraid of him. The illusion shattered 10 minutes later when a glass shattered across the marble floor. Not dropped. Thrown. The sound cracked through the room like a warning. Every head turned, but no one spoke. Roman stood near the VIP table, one hand resting casually against the edge, his posture relaxed in a way that made it worse. Calm meant controlled, and controlled meant deliberate. The manager rushed over, his voice low and apologetic, bending himself into something smaller just to stand near him. I watched from across the room as Roman said something I couldn't hear, but I saw the effect. The manager nodded too quickly, hands trembling, backing away like he'd just been given a second chance he didn't deserve. People resumed breathing, but not normally. It was careful now, measured, like no one wanted to draw attention again. I should have stayed where I was. I should have let someone else handle his table. But the hostess caught my eye and pointed, subtle but firm. VIP section. Him. Of course. I walked over with a fresh bottle of wine, my steps steady even as the room seemed to tilt toward him. Up close, the silence felt heavier. Like it had weight. Like it pressed against your chest if you stood too long inside it. I reached the table and began pouring without a word, the way we were trained. Efficient. Invisible. Safe. The bottle tilted, the liquid caught the light, and for a second everything looked normal again. Then his voice cut through it. Low. Sharp. Directed at me. Not loud, but it didn't need to be. I froze for half a heartbeat, then set the bottle down carefully. Slowly, I looked up, and this time, when our eyes met, he didn't look away. His gaze did not feel like attention, it felt like assessment, like I had just stepped into a conversation I did not agree to join. You poured that like you were somewhere else, he said, his voice even, controlled, but edged with something colder underneath. I held his stare for a second longer than I should have, then answered, maybe I am. A mistake, probably. The kind you feel before it fully lands. Around us, the table shifted slightly, his associates exchanging quick looks that disappeared as soon as they formed. No one spoke. No one moved. The room had narrowed down to the space between us. Roman leaned back in his chair, slow and deliberate, his fingers brushing the rim of the glass I had just filled. When you are here, he said, you pay attention. It was not loud, but it carried, slicing clean through the fragile quiet. I felt something tighten in my chest, not fear, not exactly, something sharper. Recognition, maybe. I had heard that tone before, from men who thought control was something you could take just by expecting it. I should have apologized. That is what every other waitress would have done. Smile, nod, step back, disappear. Instead, I stayed where I was. My hands rested lightly against the tray, steady enough that no one could see the small tremor in my fingers. I am paying attention, I said. His eyes narrowed, just slightly, not anger, not yet, more like curiosity being forced into a shape it did not like. One of the men at the table shifted in his seat, clearing his throat like he might intervene, then deciding against it. Roman's gaze did not leave mine. Then you are choosing to ignore me, he said. There it was. The shift. Not a raised voice, but a heavier one. the kind that expected compliance without asking for it. Something in the room tightened again, invisible but undeniable. I could feel the weight of every person pretending not to watch. I could feel the manager somewhere behind me, silently begging me to fix whatever this was before it turned into something worse. I set the bottle down fully this time, the soft click against the table louder than it should have been. Then I took a breath, slow and measured, like I was about to step into cold water. If you are going to raise your voice, I said, keeping mine calm, you might want to make sure it works. The silence that followed was not normal. It was absolute, complete, like the room had been emptied of everything except us. One of the glasses on the table shifted slightly as someone's hand trembled. No one dared to touch it. Roman did not move right away. He just watched me, and for a second, I thought I had miscalculated everything. Then he leaned forward, just enough to close the distance between us by an inch. Careful, he said quietly, the words shaped like a warning. That was the moment. The line you do not cross. The line you either respect or break completely. I could have stepped back. I could have ended it there. Instead, I met him halfway. Shout at me again, I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. And I will end you. No one breathed. Not the men at the table. Not the guests pretending to eat. Not even me, not fully. The words hung there, sharp and impossible to take back. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger. Not what anyone expected. Something else. Something that looked dangerously close to interest. No one moved, but everything changed. I saw it in the way his associates stopped pretending to be relaxed, in the way the air itself seemed to pull tighter around us. Roman did not react the way any man in his position should have. He did not stand, did not raise his voice, did not call anyone over. Instead, he exhaled slowly, like I had just given him something he had been missing all night. His fingers tapped once against the table, a quiet, controlled rhythm that felt louder than any outburst. Then, to my surprise, he smiled. Not broadly, not kindly, just enough to shift the entire tone of the room. In me, he repeated, almost to himself, like he was testing how the words sounded coming from someone else. I did not look away. That was the rule now, unspoken but absolute. If I broke eye contact first, I lost whatever ground I had just taken. His gaze sharpened, not with anger, but with focus. You do not look like someone who makes empty threats, he said. It was not a compliment. It was an observation, one that carried weight. I tilted my head slightly, just enough to let him know I heard him, but not enough to soften anything I had said. I do not, I answered. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt different. Less fragile, more deliberate, like something had been decided, even if no one else understood what. Behind me, I heard the faint shift of shoes against polished marble. The manager, maybe, or one of the staff trying to decide if they should intervene. No one did. Roman leaned back again, reclaiming his space without breaking the line between us. Everyone out, he said calmly. He did not raise his voice, but the command moved instantly. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. His associates stood without question. Even the guests at nearby tables began to leave, not because they were told to, but because they understood. Within seconds, the room thinned until the noise of the restaurant became distant and hollow. I remained where I was, tray still in my hands, as if nothing had changed. Roman watched me the entire time, measuring, calculating, deciding. When the last of his table cleared, he gestured lightly toward the empty chair across from him. Sit, he said. Not aggressive, not forceful, just certain. I did not move. Not immediately. I am working, I replied. His lips curved again, slightly more this time. Not anymore. There was something in the way he said it that made the words land heavier than they should have. Not a threat. Not exactly. More like a shift in reality that he expected me to accept. I set the tray down slowly on the edge of the table, the movement controlled, intentional. Then I pulled the chair out and sat. Not because he told me to, but because I chose to. That distinction mattered. Up close, the details became sharper. The faint line along his jaw that hinted at a past he did not talk about. The way his watch sat perfectly aligned on his wrist, as if even time obeyed him. And his eyes, steady, unblinking, fixed on me like I was no longer part of the background. Delilah Cross, he said. My name. Spoken like it had always belonged in his mouth. I felt it before I showed it. the brief flicker of surprise I refused to let surface. You looked that up fast, I said evenly. He shook his head once, slow and almost amused. I knew before you walked over. That should not have meant anything. But it did. It shifted something inside my chest, something I did not like. Then you already know I am not impressed, I said. His gaze held mine, unshaken. I know you are not afraid, he corrected. The difference mattered. More than he realized. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms against the table, closing the distance by just enough to make the moment intentional. Fear is useful, I said quietly. I just do not waste it on the wrong people. For the first time, something real flickered across his expression. Not control, not calculation, recognition. And that, more than anything, told me I had just stepped into something much bigger than a single night in a restaurant. The way he looked at me changed again, not softer, not kinder, just deeper, like he had decided I was worth the time it took to understand something complicated. Roman Vescari did not waste time, and the fact that he had not dismissed me yet said more than anything he could have said out loud. His fingers rested lightly against the table now, no longer tapping, no longer impatient, just still. Wrong people, he repeated quietly, as if he was turning the phrase over, testing where he fit inside it. I did not answer right away. Some questions were not meant to be answered directly. They were meant to be felt, to linger long enough to make someone uncomfortable. He noticed that too. Of course he did. You speak like someone who has already decided who deserves your attention, he said. It was not a challenge. It was closer to curiosity wrapped in control. I leaned back slightly in the chair, creating just enough space to breathe without breaking the tension that had settled between us. Everyone decides that, I said. Most people just pretend they do not. His eyes held mine, unblinking, searching for something I had not shown yet. And you? He asked, his voice lowering just enough to make the question feel personal. Where do I fall? There it was. Not a command, not a threat. A question that carried more weight than either. I could feel the answer forming before I chose whether to say it. The room was quiet now, completely empty except for the faint hum of distant conversation beyond the doors. It felt like we had stepped outside of everything else. You are still deciding that, I said finally. His expression did not change, but something in his posture did. A slight shift forward, barely noticeable, but intentional. I do not leave decisions like that unfinished, he said. The certainty in his voice was not arrogance. It was habit, the kind built over years of never being wrong where it mattered. I studied him for a moment, longer than before, letting the silence stretch in a way that most people would rush to fill. Then you should ask better questions, I replied. That earned me something new. Not a smile. Not quite. Something closer to respect, though he would never call it that. Roman reached for his glass, lifting it slowly, his eyes never leaving mine as he took a measured sip. Even that felt deliberate, like every movement was part of a language he expected others to understand. When he set it back down, the sound was soft but final. You are not what you pretend to be, he said. It was not phrased as a question this time. It was a statement. A line drawn without asking for confirmation. I felt the edge of that statement press against something I had spent years keeping buried under routine and quiet choices. I did not let it show. And you are exactly what everyone thinks you are, I said. That landed differently. I saw it in the brief stillness that followed. Not offense. Not denial. Something closer to acknowledgement, the kind you give when someone says something you cannot easily argue with. That depends on what they think, he replied. His voice had softened slightly, but not in a way that made him less dangerous. If anything, it made him more controlled. I leaned forward again, matching his earlier movement, closing the space just enough to make the moment intentional again. They think you control everything, I said. That nothing happens in this city without you allowing it. His gaze sharpened, not with anger, but with focus. And you do not believe that? He asked. I held his stare, steady, unflinching. I think control is something people claim when they are afraid to admit what they cannot predict. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. Not empty. Full. Charged with something neither of us had fully named yet. Roman studied me in a way that felt different now. Not just assessing. Not just measuring. Understanding. And that was more dangerous than anything else. You are either very brave, he said slowly, or very careless. I tilted my head slightly, considering the words before answering. Those are not opposites, I said. For the first time, He let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh, though it never fully became one. No, he agreed, his voice low, thoughtful. They are not. Then he leaned back again, reclaiming his space, but not the distance between us. That stayed exactly where it was, stretched tight and unbroken. Tell me something, Delilah, he said, his tone shifting just enough to signal a different kind of question. If you are not afraid of me, what exactly were you trying to prove when you walked over here? I met his gaze without hesitation. I was not trying to prove anything, I said. I was making sure you understood something. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus. And what is that? He asked. I held the moment for one breath longer than necessary, then answered quietly, that you are not the only one in this room who decides how things end. For a moment, neither of us moved, and the weight of what I had said settled into the space between us like something permanent. Roman did not respond immediately, and that was the first real answer he gave me. He did not rush to reclaim control. He let the silence exist. His eyes stayed on mine, steady, unreadable, but there was something underneath now that had not been there before. Not just interest, consideration. You believe that, he said finally, his voice quieter than before, not because he needed it to be, but because he chose it. It changed the entire tone of the room. I did not nod. I did not confirm. Some things lose their power when you explain them. He leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed again, but it did not feel like distance. It felt like recalibration. Like he was adjusting to a version of the situation he had not expected. Most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid being noticed by someone like me, he said. You walked straight into it. I let out a slow breath, steadying myself without letting him see the effort it took. Most people spend their lives hoping someone like you notices them, I replied. That is the difference. His gaze sharpened again, not in warning, but in focus. And what do you hope for? He asked. It was a simple question, but it landed heavier than anything else he had said. I could have answered a dozen ways. I could have deflected, turned it back on him, kept everything balanced and controlled. Instead, I chose something else. Nothing from you, I said. That was the truth, or at least the version of it I was willing to give him. Roman studied me for a long second, and I could feel the shift that answer caused. Not offense, not disbelief, something more complicated. That is a dangerous position to take, he said. I tilted my head slightly, considering him in a way that mirrored his earlier focus. Only if you think everything has a price, I said. He did not deny it. That was telling. His fingers brushed against the edge of the table again, a subtle movement that seemed to ground him more than anything else. Everything does, he said, his tone even. You just have not been asked to pay yet. I felt something in my chest tighten at that. Not fear, but awareness. He was not threatening me. He was stating a rule he had lived by long enough to believe it was universal. Then maybe I am not part of your system, I said. His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but closer than before. Everyone is part of my system, he replied. There was no arrogance in it. Just certainty. The kind that does not need to be proven because it has already been tested too many times. I leaned forward again, resting my hands lightly against the table, matching his earlier movement without thinking about it. Then you are going to have a problem, I said quietly. His eyes held mine, unblinking, waiting. Because I do not follow rules I did not agree to, I finished. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something that felt almost like anticipation. Roman did not react right away, and for a second, I wondered if I had finally pushed too far. Then he let out a slow breath, the sound barely audible, but enough to shift something in the room again. You are either very confident, he said, or you are very sure of something I do not see yet. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I let the moment stretch, just long enough to remind him that I was not rushing to meet his expectations. Maybe both, I said finally. He studied me again, deeper this time, like he was trying to find the line where confidence ended and something else began. Whatever he saw, it did not make him look away. You do not belong here, he said. It was not an insult. It was an observation, one that landed closer to the truth than I was comfortable admitting. I let out a quiet breath, my gaze steady. Neither do you, I replied. That earned me another shift, smaller this time, but just as important. His posture straightened slightly, not in defense, but in acknowledgement. I built this, he said. That does not mean you belong in it, I answered. The words hung there, heavier than anything else we had said. For the first time, he did not respond right away. He just looked at me, really looked at me, like he was seeing past the uniform, past the role, into something he had not expected to find tonight. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than ever. "Then where do you belong, Delilah?" I held his gaze, steady, unflinching, and for the first time since I had walked over to this table, I felt something shift inside me that I could not easily name. "Somewhere you cannot control," I said. Roman did not answer right away, and that silence felt different from the others, heavier, more deliberate, like he was choosing his next move with care instead of instinct. His eyes did not leave mine, but something behind them shifted, subtle and controlled, like a door opening just enough to let something through. "There is no such place," he said finally, his voice calm, almost thoughtful. It was not a dismissal. It was a belief. I leaned back slightly, letting the chair settle beneath me, creating just enough distance to breathe without breaking the tension that held everything in place. "That is what people like you tell themselves," I said quietly. His expression did not harden, but it sharpened, like he had just heard something worth remembering. "People like me," he repeated, not offended, not defensive, just curious about the category I had placed him in. I held his gaze, steady, unflinching. "The ones who think control is permanent," I said. The room beyond the doors felt miles away now, reduced to a faint hum that no longer mattered. Everything that mattered was here, at this table, in the space between us that neither of us had stepped away from. Roman's fingers brushed the edge of his glass again, a small, grounding motion that seemed almost unconscious. "Control is not permanent," he said. "It is maintained." There was something in the way he said it that made it sound less like power and more like responsibility. I noticed that, even if I did not acknowledge it out loud. "That sounds exhausting," I replied. For a brief second, something flickered across his face, not irritation, not agreement, something closer to recognition. "It is not meant to be easy," he said. I studied him for a moment, longer than before, letting myself see past the surface he presented to everyone else. There was precision there, yes, and discipline, but also something else. Something quieter. "Nothing worth keeping ever is," I said. That landed somewhere deeper than I expected, and I saw it in the way his posture shifted slightly, not retreating, not advancing, just adjusting. The air between us felt different again, less like a standoff and more like something being built, piece by piece, without either of us admitting it. "You speak like you have already lost something," he said. It was not a question, but it carried the weight of one. I felt the edge of that statement press against something I had not planned to touch tonight. I kept my expression neutral, my voice steady. "Everyone has," I said. He watched me closely, like he was trying to decide how much of that answer was deflection and how much was truth. "Not everyone understands what it means," he replied. I tilted my head slightly, considering him again, the same way he had been studying me since the beginning. "And you do?" I asked. His gaze did not waver. "I understand what it costs," he said. There was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt, just a quiet certainty that made the words heavier than anything louder could have been. I let the silence stretch after that, giving the moment space to settle into something real. Then I leaned forward again, closing the distance by just enough to make my next words deliberate. "Then you should also understand when something is not worth paying for," I said. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in warning, but in focus, like he was tracking a thought as it formed. "And what do you think is not worth the cost?" he asked. I held his gaze, steady, letting the answer come without softening it. "Control over people who do not belong to you," I said. That time, the shift was immediate. Not visible to anyone who was not paying attention, but I saw it. A stillness that went deeper than before, like I had touched something he did not expect me to reach. Roman did not speak for a moment, and in that silence, I understood something I had not planned to. This was not just about power. It was about ownership, and he had just realized that I was not offering mine. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been all night. "Everyone belongs to something," he said. It sounded less like a rule and more like a truth he had accepted long ago. I shook my head once, slow and certain. "No," I said. "Everyone chooses what they belong to." He watched me, searching for something again, but this time it felt different. Less like he was trying to define me, more like he was trying to understand a language he did not speak yet. "And what do you choose?" he asked. The question hung there, Simple, but impossible to answer without revealing something real. I let out a slow breath, steadying myself without looking away. Not you, I said. The words landed between us, sharp and final, but they did not break the moment. If anything, they made it stronger. Roman did not react the way anyone else would have. He did not push back. He did not dismiss me. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his expression calm, his eyes still locked on mine. And for the first time, there was something in them that looked less like control and more like interest in something he could not immediately claim. He did not look surprised when I said it, and that told me more than any reaction ever could. Roman Vescari was not a man who expected agreement, but he was a man who recognized resistance when he saw it. His fingers rested against the table again, still and deliberate, like he had reached a point where movement was no longer necessary. Not me, he repeated quietly, as if the words carried a weight he was testing rather than rejecting. I did not take them back. I did not soften them. Some lines only work if you leave them exactly where they land. The air between us tightened again, not in conflict, but in clarity. Whatever this was, it was no longer uncertain. He leaned forward slightly, not enough to invade my space, just enough to remind me he could if he chose to. You say that like it is a final decision, he said. His voice had changed again, quieter, more focused, like he was no longer speaking to a waitress, but to something else entirely. I held his gaze without hesitation. It is, I said. That should have ended it. That should have been the moment he dismissed me, or replaced me, or reminded me exactly where I stood in a world that clearly belonged to him. Instead, he studied me like I had just given him a problem he did not want to solve too quickly. Final decisions are rarely made in one conversation, he said. There was no challenge in his tone, just a calm certainty that made the words feel inevitable rather than forced. I let out a slow breath, steadying something inside me that had started to shift in ways I did not fully understand yet. Some are, I replied. The ones that matter. His gaze sharpened again, not with anger, but with attention. It was different now. Less about control, more about understanding something he had not expected to encounter tonight. You think this matters? He asked. I leaned forward slightly, mirroring his earlier movement without thinking about it. The space between us felt smaller now, but not suffocating. Focused. Intentional. You do, I said. That was the truth, whether he admitted it or not. I saw it in the way he had not ended this conversation, in the way he had cleared the room instead of silencing me, in the way he was still here, still listening. Roman did not respond right away, and that silence felt heavier than any words he could have chosen. Then he let out a quiet breath, almost thoughtful, like he had just reached a conclusion he was not ready to say out loud. You are right about one thing, he said finally. I did not interrupt. I did not move. I let him continue at his own pace, because for the first time, it felt like he was choosing his words carefully. I do not ignore things that matter, he said. There was something in that statement that felt less like power and more like instinct. Like he had spent too long in a world where missing the wrong detail had consequences he could not afford. I tilted my head slightly, considering him again, not as a threat, not as something to resist, but as something more complicated than I had expected. And I am one of those things. I asked. His eyes held mine, steady, unwavering. You are something I have not decided on yet, he said. That answer should have unsettled me more than it did. Instead, it felt like confirmation of something I had already understood. He was not trying to control me. Not yet. He was trying to define me. And that was a different kind of risk. Then you should be careful, I said quietly. His gaze did not shift, but something in it deepened, like he was waiting for me to finish the thought. Why is that? He asked. I held the moment for just a second longer than necessary, letting the weight of the next words settle before I said them. Because the longer you take to decide, I said, the harder it will be to walk away. The silence that followed was absolute. Not tense. Not fragile. Certain. Roman leaned back slowly, reclaiming his space again, but not breaking the connection between us. If anything, it felt stronger now, like something had locked into place without either of us fully choosing it. You assume I would want to, he said. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it now that had not been there before. Not control, not authority, something closer to interest that had crossed into intention. I met his gaze without hesitation. You will, I said. At some point. He studied me for a long moment, searching for something again, but this time it felt different. Less like he was trying to understand me. More like he was trying to understand what I would become in his world. And when that happens, he asked. I let out a slow breath, steady and controlled, the kind that keeps everything exactly where it belongs. You will find out, I said, that I meant what I said. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, and it felt like the entire world had narrowed down to the quiet space between his last question and my answer. Roman did not break eye contact, but something in his expression shifted, subtle and deliberate, like he had just crossed a line he could not step back from. It was not visible to anyone who did not know what to look for, but I saw it. The interest was no longer curiosity. It had weight now. Intention. His fingers curled slightly against the edge of the table, not restless, not impatient, just present, like he was grounding himself in something that had changed without warning. You speak like you have already seen the end of this, he said quietly. His voice did not carry far, but it did not need to. It landed exactly where it was meant to. I let the silence stretch for a second longer before answering, giving the moment time to settle into something real. I speak like I understand how people like you work, I said. That was not entirely true, but it was close enough to sound convincing. Roman tilted his head slightly, studying me again with that same controlled focus that had not left him since the moment I sat down. And how do people like me work? He asked. The question was calm, but it carried an edge, not of anger, but of precision. He wanted to know exactly where I placed him. I leaned back just enough to create space for my answer, but not enough to weaken it. You do not walk away from things that challenge you, I said. His gaze sharpened again, and this time there was no mistaking the reaction. Not offense. Recognition. And you think you are a challenge? He asked. I held his stare without hesitation, letting the answer settle before I gave it to him. I think you already decided that, I said. The silence that followed was different from the others. It was not uncertain. It was confirming something neither of us had said out loud yet. Roman let out a slow breath, the sound quiet but deliberate, like he was acknowledging something he could not ignore anymore. You are not afraid of me, he said. It was not a question. It was a conclusion. I tilted my head slightly, considering the statement before answering. I am careful, I said. That is not the same thing. His lips curved again, that faint almost smile that never fully formed, but always changed the air around him. Careful people survive, he said. There was something in the way he said it that felt less like advice and more like experience. I noticed that. I did not comment on it. And careless ones do not. I asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched me, like he was deciding whether the question deserved a real answer or not. Careless people get noticed, he said finally. And once that happens, they do not get to choose what comes next. That landed heavier than anything else he had said so far. Not because it was threatening, but because it sounded true. I felt the weight of it settle somewhere deeper than I wanted to admit. Then maybe being noticed is not the problem, I said quietly. His gaze narrowed slightly, not in warning, but in focus, like he was tracking the thought as it formed. What is, he asked. I leaned forward again, closing the distance by just enough to make the moment intentional. Who is doing the noticing? I said. The silence that followed was absolute. Roman did not move. He did not look away. And for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that had not been there before. Not just interest. Not just control. Something closer to respect, though he would never call it that. You are very sure of yourself, he said. His voice was quieter now, not because it needed to be, but because the moment demanded it. I let out a slow breath, steady and controlled, keeping my expression neutral even as something inside me shifted in response to the way he was looking at me now. No, I said. I am just sure of what I am not. His gaze held mine, searching for something again, but this time it felt different. Less like he was trying to define me. More like he was trying to understand what he could not control. And that was the moment everything changed. Because Roman Vescari did not chase things he understood. He only chased the ones he did not. And I had just made sure I was one of them. Roman did not look away, and that was the first confirmation that something had shifted beyond control. He had already decided I was not something he could dismiss, and now he was deciding what to do about it. His fingers tapped once against the table, a slow, deliberate motion that broke the stillness just enough to remind me he was still the one who set the pace. Then you understand what happens next, he said quietly. His voice carried less authority now, not because it was weaker, but because it was focused, directed. I held his gaze, steady, refusing to let the moment tilt in his favor. No, I said. I understand what you expect to happen next. That earned me a pause, brief but noticeable. Roman leaned back slightly, studying me like I had just said something worth dissecting. And what do I expect? He asked. The question was simple, but the way he asked it made it clear he was measuring my answer before I even spoke. I let out a slow breath, grounding myself before responding. You expect me to adjust, I said. To realize who you are, what this is, and decide it is easier to cooperate. His expression did not change, but something in his posture did. A subtle stillness, like I had stepped closer to something accurate. And you will not? He asked. I shook my head once, slow and certain. No. The word landed clean between us, without hesitation, without apology. Roman watched me for a long moment, and for the first time, there was something in his gaze that felt less like control and more like calculation. Not how to handle me, but how to approach something unfamiliar. You think this is about cooperation? He said. It is not. I tilted my head slightly, considering him again, not as a threat, but as a pattern I was starting to understand. Then what is it about? I asked. His eyes did not leave mine as he answered. It is about recognition. The word hung in the air, heavier than I expected. I felt it settle somewhere deeper than the rest of this conversation, like it belonged to something larger than this moment. Recognition of what? I asked quietly. Roman leaned forward slightly, closing the distance by just enough to make the next words feel deliberate. Of what matters, he said. I studied him for a second longer than usual, letting that answer sink in before deciding how to respond. And you think I matter? I asked. He did not hesitate this time. I think you are here, he said. It was not a direct answer, but it was enough. Enough to confirm that this was no longer accidental, that this moment had crossed into something intentional. I leaned back slightly, creating just enough space to breathe without breaking the tension that held everything in place. That is not the same thing, I said. His lips curved faintly again, that almost smile that never fully formed but always shifted the air around him. It is the beginning of it, he replied. The silence that followed felt different again, less like a standoff and more like something being negotiated without words. Roman's gaze remained steady, but there was something underneath it now that had not been there before. Not just interest, not just curiosity, something closer to commitment. You are not trying to impress me, he said. It was not a question. It was a realization. I shook my head once, keeping my expression neutral. No, I said. I am trying to make sure you understand me. That landed deeper than anything else I had said. I saw it in the way his posture shifted slightly, not retreating, not advancing, just adjusting to a new understanding. And what exactly should I understand? He asked. I leaned forward again, closing the distance just enough to make the moment intentional. That I am not part of your world, I said quietly, and I am not interested in becoming part of it. The words settled between us, firm and unyielding. Roman did not respond immediately, and for a second, I thought I had finally reached the point where he would end this conversation. Instead, he let out a slow breath, his gaze never leaving mine. That is not how this works, he said. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it now that felt different. Not authority, not control, something closer to inevitability. I held his gaze, unflinching. That depends on who is deciding, I said. The silence that followed was absolute. Not tense, not fragile, certain. Roman leaned back slowly, his expression calm, his eyes still locked on mine. And for the first time, there was something in them that felt less like power and more like challenge. You think you are deciding, he said. It was not dismissive. It was observational. I did not look away. I did not soften. I know I am, I replied. The moment held, stretched tight between us, neither of us stepping back, neither of us breaking the line that had been drawn from the very beginning. And then, for the first time since this started, Roman did something unexpected. He reached into his jacket, slow and deliberate, and placed a single card on the table between us. No rush, no pressure, just a quiet, controlled gesture that changed everything. Then decide what you do with that, he said. His voice was softer now, but it carried further than anything he had said all night. I looked at the card without touching it, aware that whatever choice I made next would not just end this conversation. It would define what came after, and Roman knew it. That was the part he never had to say out loud. The card sat between us like it carried more weight than paper should, simple, Unremarkable, but impossible to ignore. I did not reach for it. Not yet. Roman watched me, not pushing, not repeating himself, just waiting in a way that felt more deliberate than any command. That was the difference between control and confidence. He did not need to insist. He expected. I let my eyes drop to the card for just a second, long enough to register the clean edge, the understated design, the kind of detail that said everything without saying too much. Then I looked back at him. "You think I am going to take that?" I said. It was not a question. He tilted his head slightly, studying me again with that same quiet precision. "I think you are going to decide," he replied. His voice did not change, but something underneath it had shifted. Less certainty, more interest in the outcome. I leaned back in my chair, creating space between us, not to retreat, but to think. The room still felt empty, but no longer hollow. It felt like something had been set in motion that would not stop just because I walked away. "You said everything has a price," I said. His gaze stayed steady. "It does," he confirmed. I nodded once, slow, deliberate. "Then this is yours," I said, glancing at the card without touching it. "What does it cost?" The question landed differently than the others. Not defensive, not resistant. Curious in a way that made it clear I was not dismissing him, just measuring him. Roman leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms against the table, closing the distance again. "That depends on what you do with it," he said. That answer should have been vague. Instead, it felt specific. Like the cost was not something he would set, but something I would create. I studied him for a moment longer, letting that settle into something I could understand. "So you are not buying anything," I said. His lips curved faintly again. "No," he said. "I am offering." The word lingered in the air, quieter than the rest, but heavier. I could feel the difference between what he had said and what most men in his position would have said. This was not ownership. Not yet. It was invitation. And that made it more dangerous. I reached forward slowly, my fingers brushing the edge of the card without lifting it. The contact was light, almost absent, but it was enough to shift something in the moment. Roman did not move. He did not react. But his attention sharpened in a way that made the room feel smaller again. "You do not usually offer," I said quietly. It was not a guess. It was an observation. He held my gaze, unblinking. "You do not usually refuse," he replied. That earned him a brief pause, the kind that acknowledged something accurate without giving it more than that. I let my fingers rest on the card for a second longer, feeling the weight of a decision that had nothing to do with paper and everything to do with what came after. Then I slid it slightly across the table, not toward me, not toward him, just enough to break its position. "I do not take things I do not need," I said. His eyes followed the movement, not the card, but my hand, like he was measuring the intention behind it. "And you are sure you do not need this?" he asked. His voice was quieter now, not softer, just more focused, like the question mattered more than he wanted it to. I leaned back again, letting my hand fall away from the card completely. "I am sure I do not need anything from you," I said. The words settled between us, firm and unyielding. Roman did not respond immediately. He watched me, longer this time, like he was recalculating something he had not expected to change. Then he reached forward, not to take the card back, but to turn it slightly, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the table. The motion was small, precise, controlled. "Need is not the only reason people take something," he said. I tilted my head slightly, considering him again. "What is the other reason?" I asked. His gaze held mine, steady, unwavering. "Curiosity," he said. The word landed differently than anything else he had said, not as a statement of power, not as a condition, as a possibility. I let out a slow breath, steadying something inside me that had shifted without permission. "Curiosity is not enough," I said. He leaned back slightly, reclaiming his space without breaking the connection between us. "It is always enough," he replied. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something neither of us had named yet. I looked at the card again, still untouched, still waiting. And for the first time since this conversation started, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not fear, not pressure, something closer to awareness. Because this was not about whether I would take it. It was about whether I would think about it after I left. And Roman knew that too. That was the part he had already decided. I did not pick up the card, but I did not push it away either. And somehow that felt like the most dangerous choice of all. Roman noticed that. Of course he did. His gaze lingered on the space between my hand and the card, not impatient, not demanding, just aware. You were thinking about it, he said quietly. It was not a question. It was a recognition of something I had not intended to show. I leaned back slightly, creating distance again, not from him, but from the decision sitting between us. I am thinking about why you are not insisting, I replied. His lips curved faintly, that same restrained expression that never fully revealed what he was actually thinking. Insisting is for people who are unsure, he said. The words landed with a quiet certainty that made them harder to dismiss. I studied him for a moment, letting that settle into something I could understand. And you are sure? I asked. He did not hesitate. I am patient, he said. That was not the same answer, and we both knew it. I let out a slow breath, steadying the shift inside me that I had not planned for. Patience implies time, I said. You do not strike me as someone who waits. His gaze sharpened slightly, not in disagreement, but in interest. I wait for things that matter, he said. There it was again. That word, matter. It had become the center of this conversation without either of us choosing it. I glanced at the card once more, still untouched, still positioned perfectly where he had left it. And you decided this matters, I said. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands against the table, closing the space again in a way that felt less like control and more like intention. I decided you were worth not rushing, he said. The words were simple, but they carried something heavier than anything else he had said tonight. Not ownership, not expectation, something closer to acknowledgement. I felt it, whether I wanted to or not. That is a risky decision, I said quietly. His expression did not change, but something in his posture did. A subtle shift, like he had already considered that possibility and dismissed it. Risk is part of every decision, he said. The difference is knowing which ones are worth it. I held his gaze, steady, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make the next words deliberate. And you think I am worth the risk? I said. It was not a question, but it demanded an answer anyway. Roman did not look away. I think you are already changing the outcome, he said. That landed deeper than anything else had. Not because it was flattering, but because it felt true in a way I had not expected. I leaned back again, creating space to think, to breathe, to remind myself exactly where I was and who I was speaking to. You are giving me too much influence, I said. His lips curved slightly again, but this time there was something more defined in it. Not amusement. Recognition. No, he said. I am recognizing what is already there. The room felt smaller again, not physically, but in the way everything outside this moment had faded into something distant and irrelevant. I looked at the card one more time, then back at him. And if I walk away, I said. His gaze did not waver. Then you walk away, he replied. The answer was immediate, but not dismissive. It carried a quiet certainty that made it clear he was not trying to trap me. He was offering a choice. That was the part that made it complicated. I tilted my head slightly, studying him again, trying to understand something that did not fit the pattern I had expected. You are not trying to control this, I said. He did not deny it. Control only works when the other person accepts it, he said. You would not. That answer settled into something deeper than I had planned to acknowledge. He had already accepted a limit I had not explicitly set. That changed things. So you are adjusting, I said. His gaze held mine, steady, unshaken. I am paying attention, he corrected. The same words he had used earlier, but they carried a different meaning now. Not a command, a decision. I let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of that shift settle into something real. Then, without looking away, I reached forward and turned the card back to its original position. Not taking it, not rejecting it, just resetting it. Roman's eyes followed the movement, not the card, but the intention behind it. That is not a refusal, he said quietly. I held his gaze, steady, unflinching. It is not an acceptance either, I replied. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something neither of us needed to define yet. Roman leaned back slowly, his expression calm, but his eyes sharper than before. Good, he said. His voice was quieter now, but it carried further than anything else he had said. That means this is not over. And for the first time since this conversation began, I understood exactly what he meant. For a moment, the weight of his words settled deeper than anything else he had said that night, not because they were louder, but because they were certain. This is not over. It was not a threat. It was not a promise. It was something in between, something that did not need explanation. I did not respond immediately. I let the silence stretch, not to challenge him, but to understand what had just shifted. Because something had. Not just in him. In me. I had come to this table to prove a point, to draw a line. To remind him that I was not someone who could be folded into his world without consequence. And somehow, without realizing it, I had stepped into a conversation that no longer belonged to a single moment. Roman watched me carefully, not with impatience, not with expectation, but with something closer to awareness. Like he knew exactly what that silence meant. "You are not leaving yet," he said quietly. It was not a command. It was an observation. I tilted my head slightly, considering him again, feeling the edge of something I could not easily define. "I have a job," I said. His gaze did not waver. "Not at this table," he replied. That earned him a brief pause, the kind that acknowledged the shift without agreeing to it. I let out a slow breath, steadying something inside me that had started to feel less controlled than I liked. "You are changing the rules," I said. He did not deny it. "I am adjusting to you," he said. The honesty in that answer landed differently than anything else he had said, not because it gave him less power, but because it showed he was willing to use it differently. I studied him for a moment, longer than before, letting myself see the pattern clearly now. He was not trying to win this. He was trying to understand it. And that made it harder to walk away from than anything else. "That is not something you usually do," I said. His lips curved faintly again, that restrained expression that never fully revealed what he was thinking. "You are not something I usually meet," he replied. The silence that followed felt heavier, not with tension, but with recognition. I could feel the truth in that statement settle into something real, something that made the entire night feel less accidental. I glanced at the card again, still untouched, still waiting in a way that made it impossible to forget. "You are very confident," I said quietly. His gaze held mine, steady, unshaken. "No," he said. "I am very aware of what I want." That answer did not surprise me. It confirmed something I had already understood. Roman Vescari did not chase things he could easily define. He moved toward things that resisted him. I leaned back slightly, creating space to think, to breathe, to remind myself that this was still my decision. "And you decided you want this," I said. He did not hesitate. "I decided I am not done with this," he corrected. That was more precise, more honest. I respected that, even if I did not say it out loud. The room felt different now, not empty, but suspended, like time had slowed down just enough for everything to matter more than it should have. I let my fingers rest lightly against the table, grounding myself in something real. "You are used to things ending the way you expect," I said. His gaze sharpened slightly, not in disagreement, but in focus. "I am used to understanding how they will end," he replied. I nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Then this is going to be new for you," I said. The words landed softly, but they carried something deeper than anything else I had said. Roman did not respond immediately. He watched me, longer this time, like he was measuring something he could not easily define. Then he let out a quiet breath, almost thoughtful. "Good," he said. The word was simple, but it carried weight. Not resistance, not dismissal, acceptance. I held his gaze, steady, unflinching, and for the first time since this conversation began, I felt something shift into clarity. This was not about power anymore, not in the way I had expected. It was about something far more complicated, something neither of us fully controlled. Roman reached forward slowly, his fingers brushing the edge of the card again, but he did not move it. He just rested his hand there, like it was a marker of something that had already been set in motion. "You will think about it," he said quietly. It was not a question. I did not answer right away. I let the moment settle, letting the truth of that statement sit exactly where it belonged. Then I met his gaze again, steady and certain. "Maybe," I said. That was enough. It was not agreement. It was not refusal. It was something in between, something that left the door open without stepping through it. Roman understood that. I saw it in the way his expression shifted, not visibly, but in the way his focus sharpened just enough to confirm it. "That is all I need," he said. And for the first time that night, I realized something I had not planned to admit. He was right. I stayed seated for 1 second longer than necessary, just enough to feel the weight of everything that had been said settle into something real, something that would not disappear when I stood up. Roman did not rush me, and that was the final confirmation of what this had become. Not control, not pressure, something far more deliberate. I pushed the chair back slowly, the sound soft against the polished floor, but loud enough in the silence that still surrounded us. For the first time since I had sat down, I broke eye contact, not out of hesitation, but because I had already decided what came next. I should get back to work, I said. My voice was steady, unchanged, but it carried something different now. Not resistance, not defiance, awareness. Roman did not stop me. He did not reach for my hand or the card or anything else that would turn this moment into something smaller than it was. He simply watched me stand, his gaze following every movement with the same quiet intensity it had held all night. You will, he said. It was not a question. It was not even directed at what I had just said. It was something else entirely. I paused for half a second, just long enough to acknowledge the weight behind those two words, then turned to face him fully again. You are very sure of that, I said. He leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharper than ever. I do not need to be sure, he replied. I only need to be right once. That landed deeper than I expected. Not because it was confident, but because it was patient. It meant he was not waiting for tonight to end anything. He was waiting for it to begin something. I let out a slow breath, steadying the shift inside me that I had not planned for when this night started. Then you should hope you are, I said quietly. His lips curved faintly again, that same restrained expression that had followed every moment he found interesting. I do not hope, he said. I observe. I nodded once, accepting that answer for what it was. Honest, controlled, unapologetic. I glanced down at the table one last time, at the card still resting exactly where it had been left, untouched, unchanged, but no longer insignificant. Then I looked back at him. Then keep observing, I said. The words were simple, but they carried something more now. Not dismissal, not invitation, something in between. Roman held my gaze, unflinching, like he was memorizing something he did not intend to forget. I will, he said. His voice was quieter now, not because it needed to be, but because the moment demanded it. I turned then, finally breaking the line that had held us in place since the beginning. The room felt different as I stepped away, not because it had changed, but because I had. The noise returned slowly, the distant hum of conversation, the quiet movement of staff resetting tables, the world continuing as if nothing had happened. But something had. I could feel it in the way my steps felt more deliberate, in the way the air no longer felt neutral. It felt aware. As I moved back toward the main floor, I did not look back immediately. I did not need to. I knew he was still watching. That was not arrogance. It was certainty. When I reached the edge of the room, just before stepping fully back into the rhythm of everything I had momentarily left behind, I stopped. Just for a second. Then I turned my head slightly, not fully, just enough to catch him in my peripheral vision. He had not moved. Not from his chair, not from that exact position, his hand still resting near the card, his posture unchanged, but his attention entirely fixed. On me. Not the room. Not the door. Me. I let that settle for half a breath, then looked forward again and kept walking. Because that was the only move that still belonged entirely to me. And as I stepped back into the noise, back into the routine, back into the version of my life that existed before this night, I realized something I had not expected. This was not about whether I would take the card. It was about the fact that I did not need to anymore. Because he had already taken something instead. My attention. And for a man like Roman Vescari, that was the only thing he ever had to earn.